You can find us on Spotify, YouTube, and Apple Podcasts. Our guest today is Melanie Sulaver. She has many initials, MSRD, CDN, CISSN, and she's the founder of a small but mighty business, Nutrition by Mel. So you can easily find her if you just Google Nutrition by Mel. She's a registered dietitian working to bridge the gap between women's health and performance nutrition. As a speaker, counselor, and coach, Mel works with women in sport, educating on disordered eating, low energy availability, relative energy deficiency in sport, menstrual health, fertility, and menopause. Her goal is to change the narrative surrounding what it means to navigate life as a woman, athlete, and a mom. And you are a mother of one, soon to be a mother of dos, correct?
I know. It's all happening.
Of course, Cassie's only a mother of one right now. Who knows? She might end up being a mother of 5 or something.
So perfect.
Have a big old family, like enough to field a basketball team. So, Mel, let's start off a little bit with, I guess, well, one, being a mother oftentimes serves as an inspiration for what you want to study. So you deal with women's health, performance nutrition. I mean, the three of us know each other through ISSN, which is a sports nutrition organization. So how did you come about with sort of putting all of this together, and why you're focused on what you're focusing, in terms of, how you educate people now?
I think a lot of it really just stems back to filling in gaps that don't exist within the performance nutrition, sports nutrition space. So, I grew up an athlete. I played soccer through high school, in collegiate, kind of through, transitioned out in college. I'm function within the disordered eating disorder space as well. So much of my initial mission was grounded in how do we best support athletes in fueling for optimal performance, understanding how disordered eating sits on a spectrum. And what I found is as we transition through life, so you have, our adolescent athletes, and then you go through college, what happens after college when you have, less than 1% of athletes who actually go professional. And even that is even smaller depending on the sport that they're in. And they all typically continue to train because I think we could argue as athletes, we really maintain that part of our identity throughout the course of our life. And I just started to see a big gap when, especially in support of female athletes, I'm addressing amenorrhea and low energy availability and kind of the byproducts of that. Now you have people who are then looking to get pregnant, in some cases, that's the next stage of life. And with that brings expected body changes, expected performance changes. And many of them are temporary, but we need to wrap our head around what that means. And what's interesting about it is continues to be discussion around it in high level sport, but the actual support for these female athletes is incredibly limited. The research even more in actual athletes, let alone baseline women's health. So that's this idea of bridging the gap is where do we understand how to fuel and support our bodies as females kind of going through this pregnancy, postpartum transition? And then what does that look like as we look to return to sport, at a high level or, competitive local level, or even just those of you who are looking to continue to challenge what your body is capable of for the rest of your life. So for me personally, it didn't exist. Even navigating it in my own body, I'm like, where are the resources? Where is the supportive education?
It really exists like with the doctors either, because I can tell you, like I saw like a couple different doctors before I settled with like my one doctor, and like I had one doctor tell me don't even walk. And then, I had my doctor who I think was like 80, and literally anything I said to him, he was like, do whatever you want. Like he was much more, and I don't know if that's just because he was so old and he didn't care, or he was just so old and had been around long enough to see everything. But like, I think that even from that standpoint, it's not entirely clear from the medical professional, like you said, even for non-athletes. And then I'm sure you can relate too, is the comments I got when I was pregnant and working out in the gym, you know, all that misinformation that if you do this, you know, that's bad, don't do this. Like, it's just confusing to navigate in general. So definitely think that what you're doing in terms of trying to bridge the gap and provide some information is really needed, especially for those of us that are active.
Let
Yeah.
me ask you this.
It does not exist.
I'll give you sort of a story. When I first met my wife, this was many, many years ago. She ran track and cross country in college. So we're talking the 1980s. And she would tell me these stories about, again, remember this is 1980s. The coach would tell female runners, and actually the male runners too, that they were fat. They would weigh them. And she said the guys didn't care. They're like, oh, I'm fat. I guess I'll just run more or eat less or something. But obviously it affects women a lot differently. So a lot of women end up with eating disorders back in college. And what's interesting is, you know, back then they would actually weigh the runners and say, you need to hit this target weight, which physiologically we don't make sense. Although, you know, mentally and emotionally, it's not the best approach. But we know for distance running, there isn't, quote, an ideal weight to run at. But I think what's interesting is most, if not all of her friends no longer run. And this is at the Division I level. Yeah, whereas
that makes me sad.
Well, what's interesting is I think the Division I level, there's so much pressure on you that it's almost better you run at a D2 or D3 level where it's kind of, you compete, but it's fun. I mean, most of them are not on scholarship. Certainly D3, you're not, it's non-scholarship.
Sure.
Yes. So in a way, it's, you know, I told my wife a long time ago, I think you're better built for actually cycling than running, but she loved running so much. But it's interesting how those patterns in college, well, let me backtrack. She did not have those patterns in high school. She ate normally, she ate whatever.
Yeah.
It was college that actually, in a way, ruined a lot of the way women perceive food. But what's interesting is there's a huge sex difference. It did nothing to the guys. I mean, they told the guys they were fat.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously runners are never fat. It's sort of like if you're a male runner, you weigh 150 and the coach is like, you know what, you're a little fat. You need to get to 145. Most guys process that as like, oh, okay, well, I mean, okay, I'll lose 5 pounds. So I guess, and I'm trying to dovetail this into the way society now is viewing body positivity, i.e. the prevalence of people using Ozempic to lose weight. And so I'm thinking, okay, wait a minute. Is body positivity, was it all a scam? Because if all these people who said it's okay to be fat and overweight now are losing weight on Ozempic, wait, so was that just all people just telling themselves they're okay when in fact they never felt okay? So I'm kind of using, you know, my wife and her friends, you know, in college, sort of dovetailing it into what it's like today, because there's a lot of things going on there. So, you know, I kind of want your thoughts on that.
I have thoughts
right,
too.
let me
Elle to go first.
Yeah, let me see. I mean, different. I think when we get, yeah, we can, the body positivity piece is, I think, its own discussion. When you get into the female athlete specific kind of collegiate triggers into disordered eating and eating disorders, I feel like I've seen it go one of two ways. Yeah, you either lose people, like I no longer play soccer. I tried to get back into it so many times, but I have such a awful association with it. And I'll tell you, I played for a D3 school, but it was a competitive D3 school, and just couldn't get past it. So I've seen that, and then I have also seen kind of this extreme end of in the search of validation for someone else, or in the search of validation to be in a smaller body or a higher performing body. And in many cases, as a young athlete, that gets confused with being in a smaller body because of how the way in which whoever said what they said stuck in this person. For me, it was, you're not fit enough. And at 18, I took that to be like, well, I have to be leaner. Like if I'm leaner, then I'm faster. Just took it and went with it, right? Which is relatively common. So I say it's unfortunate that your wife's friends never continued with running, because my hope is at some point they were doing that because it was something they loved. For me, it was a sad thing to let go of, and I've done a lot of work to let go of it, as I help other people do. But it's just a sad, I think, part of what is possible and can happen.
Well, I think just to
heading
clarify,
into.
just a lot of them quit because they were injured because I mean, you get beat the hell out of in college. So, because they
Yeah.
know a new group of athletes always come in. So it's not like, I got you maybe for 4 years and then it's like a new crop. So, but yeah, a lot of them they just got hurt. Yeah.
I think some people too get burned out. I mean, just Tim, my husband Tim, he has like no desire to do any type of regimented exercise. I mean, he's physically active, but in terms of like
Mm.
being in the gym, it's like a thing for him just because for football when he played in college, it was such a demanding schedule and it was like also what you're doing on off season and this and that. And he did that from, a very young age. And then obviously through college that now he's like, I don't ever want to do that again. He's like, I lived, eat, breathe gym. He's like, I want a different experience. So physical activity looks very different for him too. So I'm sure it can be a combination of being injured if you had a negative experience, like you mentioned, and then on top of it, just not wanting to do like being burnt out on that grind, which I would imagine has got to be pretty common now. Cause I look at, my younger nieces and they're playing soccer like year-round club soccer. There's no like breaks like there used to be. No, soccer season's this, and then maybe you do softball a different season. This is like all year, nonstop, overlapping with your school team, your club team. It seems like a lot.
Well, I think, and again, I think it's so person specific because the experiences have the ability to kind of go one way, go the other way. I think speaking to the injury, this gets into kind of like, how do we support female athletes through puberty? So the other part of education that I support is like, okay, well, when we are coaching our young girls the way we coach young boys, and again, you both know, like, human bodies are human bodies. So there's not huge, very large degrees of variability. But when we look at puberty and what happens to a female body versus what happens to a male body, a male body has more testosterone and they naturally start to become leaner. Whereas when we go through puberty, we're going to gain fat mass. Like our body is going to change. And so when you are in a sport like track and field, if you are in a sport that, you are wearing certain types of clothing or may kind of fall into this category of being a little bit more aesthetic, then, and your body is exposed, then, and the feedback you're getting is your body needs to be smaller, or this is, bodies look a specific way in this sport because you're seeing elite athletes that you're comparing your body to at 14, 15, 16 years old, and yours is gaining fat mass, then that can be really troubling. And then if everyone around you, coaches, trainers, parents, and then society is telling you this is what it needs to look like, then that's going to lead to intentional disorder, unintentional underfueling coming from Cassie, as you're talking about with soccer, like year-round, nonstop club, school, travel. I mean, it's easy to dig ourselves into some of these holes, and that's going to show up differently in a young girl's body than a young boy's body. They're both at risk, but all of that, I think that even heads into the body positive piece of this, Joey, is there's definitely an extreme end of that discussion. There's an extreme end of that discussion within the sports community. There's an extreme end of that discussion within the dietitians community. I've heard Cassie talk about this before, and we are fully aligned on how problematic that has become. Because like anything else, it just becomes this blanket recommendation discussing general piece of information that doesn't actually help somebody make an informed decision about their body. And I feel like as dietitians specifically, that's what we need to do. We're here to help people make informed decisions about their body based on the science and evidence we have available, and then them in their life and their circumstances. So
I think too, with body
scary.
positivity, one of the things that, at least this is in my personal opinion, is that, it's really more of like the shape of your body or where you're at or what you decide to do with your body is not a moral indicator of you as a person. And so what I ran into a little bit when I was in the eating disorder community is that we were quote unquote allowed, or maybe not chastised for talking about the health implications of being underweight or the hormonal disruptions of being severely underweight. But I was also in a field where talking about the hormonal disruptions or the health implications of being overweight was not allowed. And if you even bothered touching on it or saying certain things, then you were labeled as fat phobic. And I found that very challenging because I think exactly like you said, it's this kind of all or nothing thinking. It's either this extreme or it's this extreme, and it's really somewhere in the middle. And then it makes people that are, especially for women, because you can go on a diet if you want to, if that's right for you, and that doesn't make you fat phobic. But a lot of times you'll see in this whole body positivity community that, you're not allowed to do something. And I think that makes it even more challenging for, women, because of course men don't, not that they never encounter this, but I feel like they just don't encounter the same types of experiences that women do.
What? Well, I think they do. They just process it differently.
Well, you're hardwired to process it different. We are hardwired to be more emotional because at our core, I mean, from an evolutionary standpoint, I'm supposed to be a mom and I am supposed to be more emotionally in tune to, things around me because that's what helps me raise my child. Whereas you as a male are supposed to go out and feed me essentially and protect me from, scary beasts. So like,
Well,
you're not supposed to be.
I think what's kind of funny, slight sidebar, is if you hear guys talk to each other about when they make fun of like, hey, your belly's fat or whatever, guys laugh at each other, which is kind of interesting because girls won't laugh at each other about that. But guys like, yeah, I'm fat. I drink too much beer. Maybe I should quit. So we do approach it differently. But I actually have a pragmatic sort of question for both of you. My wife coached high school cross country for many, many years. It wasn't until we moved to Stewart that she quit coaching cross country. So these are both male and female athletes. And I would go to track meets quite frequently. My kids ran track in high school. And there is a pattern there where young girls can do quite well in cross country. And it's a conversation my wife and I would have umpteen times. We'd always say, wait till she hits puberty. And then there's going to be issues around, okay, now their hips start to maybe expand a little. They're going to put on body fat. And what's interesting is if you look at boys and girls before puberty, when they run, you can sort of predict the boys that are really good, they're going to remain good because when they hit high school, puberty, testosterone, more muscle mass, bone mineral density. But with women, it is highly unpredictable because you don't know what their body type is when they go through puberty. So really the pragmatic question is this. Let's say you're working with a 12-year-old girl, great distance runner, doing well. And now as she's transitioning through puberty in high school, it's like, oh my God, I'm gaining fat. I'm gaining weight. I'm not running as fast. In fact, a lot of them run slower, which has got to mess you up as an athlete. You're like, wait a minute.
Yeah.
11 and 12.
It does.
I'm kicking butt. Now I'm 14 and 15. What the hell is going on? And with guys, it's different. They all just keep getting better.
And add in the fact that we are now going through PMS and are more emotionally sensitive on top of everything else.
So what do you say to these athletes who were kicking butt and now they've gone through, they're going through these changes through puberty, and it's got to mess up your head because it's like, wait a minute, what's going on? I used to be really good. Now I'm just okay.
I think everybody takes it differently. I think there will be some people that will not bother them and some people it will bother them. I know from my own experience, it would be more of, at least what I used to impart on my clients, is that your athletic ability or your physical appearance is not like who you are as a person. So it might be something as I say is simple, but it's not simple, helping them kind of navigate in terms of like, well, who else are you as a person? Do you still enjoy running? Do you want to still do it? Like if you're still having fun, by all means, go do it. But if it's no longer, fun for you, even though I know competition's not always fun, but if it's causing more harm than good, then it might be, time to step back and explore maybe other sports or other types of physical activity that, would be better suited for what you're going through. I'm sure Mel will have a different or similar take on that.
No, I think looking at the identity as buckets, right? Like how do we view ourselves? What are the stories we tell ourselves about ourselves, even when we're young? And this is also part of working with minors. Like it's part of why they're minors, because their scope is so, not to say that there aren't adults who have a very limited scope of ideas, but their ability to kind of see past themselves is pretty small. So just understanding, yes, their relationship to it. And then this is where I actually think in a larger sense, if you have one person who's particularly struggling, having some one-on-one time with them, but this is also a conversation that's helpful to have with a group of young girls. So you kind of get a feel of like, what is the culture in this, on this particular team? Like, what are the conversations being had about this? I think it comes into conversations about like, do you understand what happens to your body when it goes through puberty? Do the people supporting you understand what happens to your body when it goes through puberty? So in my mind, and I know this is more complicated than it seems, even though I'm like, this doesn't feel like it should be that complicated, but you think about puberty education, menstrual health education, it's so shitty. It's really shitty the way that we get the education we get when we're young, how it's conveyed. And some of that is like deeply stigmatized still. Culturally, it's deeply stigmatized. So you also have athletes who come from different cultural backgrounds or like familial backgrounds. Maybe you have parents who are willing to talk about these things, you don't. So again, if we have the ability to have that conversation in a safe space to say, okay, where are you? How do you feel about this? Where does that fit within your identity, within your sport? But also, here's what you can expect. And if you allow for your body to go through this process. So Joey, this is where I think the conversation needs to start to head is female athletes are also not designed to peak until later on in life. So you may have this very speedy or like higher level performing athlete when they're very young, but if we don't actually allow for them to go through puberty and they fight to stay in this 12, 13, 14-year-old body, then they're actually never going to get there. We won't even have an opportunity to see what they're capable of, which is why I think coming back to the previous conversation about collegiate athletes who either get injured and aren't able to participate, we're also seeing some athletes like come to sport, particularly the running community at large, where they weren't great athletes or like kind of on people's radar in high school, in college. They came into the sport later on in life. They had a different experience with athletics and training. Their bodies kind of went through this process. And so they have the ability to push their body at a time when they're ready. Like the body's actually ready to be challenged in a different way than it was when they were younger. So
I wasn't necessarily an athlete in high school. I mean, cheerleading, it was competitive, but I still struggle with calling that a sport sometimes. But maybe because my dad always teased me too. But I will say this, like even of the people that did know that were more into sports, no one told me that, like my body or my performance was going to change. I mean, they told me that there was puberty, but the extent of the puberty talk that I got was like, you're going to get your period and it sucks. Like, that's it. Like, so, I think like, if I had a dad like Jose, that's like, hey, like your performance might change. Like maybe I would have taken it differently, which I think you touch on the piece of like education is like really big because when you don't know what to expect, change is uncomfortable and it's not fun at any age, let alone 12, 13, and everyone's going through it at different times and it's a hot mess.
Yeah, and don't you think it's rare, certainly at the high school level, it's rare to find someone who could even talk to young women, young girls about this. I mean, because most of the coaching in high school is, hey, we're going to work out, you're going to lift, and we're going to win, or maybe we won't win, but we'll try to win. And certainly a lot of the male coaches stay completely away from those kinds of talks because, for multiple reasons. And whether female coaches even feel comfortable, it's almost like by default, you're like, you should talk to your parents about this, not really to the coach. Because I feel like, don't you think the coach, in a way, it almost infringes on the parents when these are conversations that really should be parent-child, right?
Yeah, but what also happens if you have a coach that grew up in a disordered pattern and doesn't have listen, there are lots of people today that, are in their 60s and 70s that still have the mentality of eating cottage cheese and not lifting weights is the only way that a woman is going to stay thin, right?
Cottage cheese is a great source of casein, but
and protein, but you don't need to just eat cottage cheese, but I think that, some of those mentalities are still very rampant. So what do you do when you have a coach that has that mentality? You're not necessarily giving evidence-based information and it could cause more harm. And then to, what you're saying, like parents have a right in terms of what their kids should know and don't know. But I think just more education, I think you can do education without infringing on parents. I think you can do
100%.
it based.
I mean, you get menstrual health education in public school. Like that's a class that you in health class, someone is giving you, here's the puberty talk, and it's a video or a talk, and you can show up or not show up. So I in no way think you are infringing. I think when I have given these talks to high school athletes, I usually like to do it in like 3 different sessions. So there's just something about menstrual health. There's something specific about performance and puberty and what that looks like. And you have everybody in the room for at least one of those, the parents, the athletes, and the coaches. So everyone is hearing the same thing. Leave a lot of time for discussion, which is what I love about this with all of you. Like we're having a conversation. So in many ways, like just talking at people doesn't always help, but allowing for there to be a discussion afterwards. Because Cassie, speaking to what you just said, there are many women that I work with that are, I'm going to say, more masters athletes. So now you talk about getting into perimenopause, menopause. They never knew what was normal for their body to begin with because they never had a normal menstrual cycle, or they were on birth control their whole life, or, because I have people who sometimes they have kids, sometimes they don't. So then you enter in kind of the disordered eating relationship to body piece on top of it, and it gets very complicated. So how do we change that? So again, like you can grow up and just understand your body. This is a basic literacy point that I think as human beings, we all really deserve to just understand what's happening so we can make decisions about it, let alone in sport. Anyway, that was a little ranty, but
I have a funny side story though, just when you were talking about menstrual education in school. So I don't know if do they still do Take Your Kid to Work Day? So this was when I was younger. We were still living in Florida. My dad was a teacher at middle school, and it was Take Your Kid to Work Day. I don't know why my dad thought it would be great to take me in like, second grade to work when he was showing the Miracle of Life video, which was like an old school 1980s video. And I will just let you know that the image of like the crowning baby coming out is still seared in my head from seeing that in second grade. That was the extent of like sexual education right there, was just playing that video in science class. Like
I can see that left an indelible mark in your brain.
It really did.
Oh gosh. Yeah, it's really unfortunate. So the way that I see it, there are a number of different entry levels to how we could start to shift this. That's the bigger one. To be honest, one of the reasons I love presenting at conferences is because you get in a room full of people, and hey, if 2 or 3 of them reach out to speak to their team or their organization, then those people get to disseminate information, and those people get to disseminate information. So just starting to have a conversation about what does this look like for us to learn about what this means would be helpful. But yeah, it's hard. I mean, I don't work with athletes under the age of 16 one-on-one. That's my limit. I personally find it's hard to support young athletes because most of the time, in my experience, I then also have a parent who has some sort of pattern that is playing out. And this is, what can I do if I'm speaking to this child and then the other feedback they're getting is still supporting all of these pieces we're trying to work through? It's messy and it's hard, and it's not going to be perfect, but if we can start having a conversation in spaces where the culture can start to change, then more of that feedback can be supportive to this athlete than the one message they're getting that is not actually helping them move forward in sport, in life, in their health as a human being.
Yeah. Well, culture changes slowly. But yeah, I agree. It's certainly the most difficult group to work with are under 16, because you're really working with parents. You're not really working with the child. I mean, when my wife and I coached travel softball, it was these girls they were under 16, really under 15. And really it was the parents that were the pain in the ass. The kids were great. It's like, oh my God, if no parents were around, this would be a really fun thing to do. But let's transition into going from young youth athletes to moms, because you both are moms, right? I mean, our kids are grown; they're 24 years old, so that was a long time ago being a parent. But my observation from women who have had kids, women who work out regularly or maniacally or consistently, they're all really great at getting their original body composition back. However, my observation is that is rare. It is rare. And I have relatives who've had kids and they still say, oh, I have my baby fat. And I'm like, but your baby's 10 years old. So how do you approach that in terms of optimizing nutrition for moms to be, but also moms who have, they have young kids and, they tell you, they'll say, Mel, I don't have time. I'm so busy. I got this, I got that. Yet clearly both of you are both very busy and yet you find time to work out, you find time to eat well. How do you approach that?
So I think ideally for me, I have them either pre-pregnant, like preconception. So kind of my favorite way to support somebody is preconception through the pregnancy. And then by the time we get to postpartum, like they are ready for postpartum, because to be honest, I think postpartum is the hardest part of all of it. And that says a lot because as Cassie alluded to earlier, the medical system does really no support in helping with us in our own bodies. You think of every time you go to a prenatal visit when you are pregnant, everything is actually about the baby. It's actually not about us at all. None of it.
Needle visits were so short. They were like 10. I mean, I was grateful because I didn't really feel like sitting there, but like my doctor would be like, questions. I'm like, no, he's like, all right, bye. I'm like, okay.
It is always about we're measuring the baby. We're talking about the baby. It's not actually your check-in. I think more recently they've instituted maybe some like mental health screening pieces, but it still needs a long way to go. So anyway, ideally I have them through this timeline. And a lot of what I initially talk to people about is, understanding the baseline. So where are you heading into this? What is your diet like? What are your movement patterns like? What are your preferred forms of movement? How do you like to train? And what are the expectations that you have for your performance? So let's separate the sport performance from the body, because I think too many times, I know you'll both agree with me here, we get body composition convoluted with performance, and they're different. They can play into each other, but we're talking about two different things. So what is your body expectation? What is your performance expectation? And let's talk about what that might look like, because I cannot guarantee you that you're not going to have hyperemesis in your pregnancy. I can't guarantee you that you're going to be able to eat salmon and avocado and brown rice and your noodle bowl in your first trimester. There's a lot of people who feel like garbage those first 14 weeks, and they're lucky if they can tolerate anything white. So the first thing I tend to do is work through if there are disordered patterns to eating, if you have safe food lists versus foods that you're scared to eat because you've got to eat. So if the only thing you can eat is a piece of white bread and you're so used to having 150 grams of protein a day, but you can't look at chicken, beef, you can't look at anything that has high quality protein, then we got to talk about that before we get there, because otherwise that's going to create a whole nother level of anxiety and stress that you don't need, and we need you to eat. So there's that initial piece about identifying expectations, creating new expectations, and kind of working through some of those thought patterns within that process. And then as we go through with movement, I always bring in a pelvic floor physical therapist, or I'm working with their strength coach, run coach, whatever like sport they're part of. And some of this is going to be variable, to be honest. Are we talking about someone who's a professional or elite level athlete who this is their job? So there's a different type of pressure on returning to sport than someone who, again, locally competitive or competitive with themselves, and I am not taking away, again, I identify as an athlete. I am not taking away from your personal goals, but let's talk about the pressure you're putting on yourself and the time to heal and the time to recovery and what is most important, and how we can kind of list this hierarchy of needs for you, because there's absolutely a time and a space for you to return to sport. But if we don't have to make that happen in a 4-month window, otherwise you lose your contract, then there's no reason for us to do that. Actually, taking those 4 months in these early days postpartum is incredibly important for your recovery of nutrients, or your just repletion of nutrients that you've lost through pregnancy, depending on your labor and birth, which, again, even with a vaginal delivery, there could be tearing, there could be all kinds of trauma that occurs that is going to require additional nutrient energy to, I mean, it's true. We just don't, And I want to be thoughtful too, because I don't think we're fragile. I don't want to create this idea that women are fragile, but we need to take seriously the cost of pregnancy, birth, and then the need to recover for that postpartum before we start looking at, okay, now we need to throw exercise and performance expectations on top of this, which, by the way, require additional energy and nutrients. So oftentimes at that point, you have people, I'm just like walking us through, but by the time we get to postpartum, now outside of performance, you have people who want their body back, right? So now you get into this body composition conversation. Most people will start restricting intake, but that can impact your recovery. That can impact your lactation. It's sure as hell going to impact your energy levels if you're already sleep deprived, unless you have a night nurse. Some people do, most of us don't. So there's a lot happening. And so what I like to do is prepare people for all of that before we get there. So here's what is realistic to expect. Here's what is going to be outside of our immediate control, because there are things we are going to have to make decisions on about in real time, how your body responds to things. So I also like to talk about pregnancy as, being able to kind of let go of like, here's what you expect, here's where we're going to let it go, and here are the things we can be conscious and deliberate about based on where you are right now, and we'll move in real time. So that's the bigger overview piece.
Is there, if you approach it, obviously I'm not anyone who has experience being pregnant. So thinking of this as a guy and men pragmatically, after you've given birth, is there any data on what a reasonable time frame is to, let's say, get back to your original weight or original level of fitness? Have those studies been done? I have no idea. That's why I'm asking.
I don't think so. And I don't even know if you could, because it's really like to what she was saying, that the post-birth is, I mean, actually, when you look at calorie needs and what the nutritional recommendations are, it's really not that many extra calories during pregnant. It's more, you need 500 minimum extra calories after you've given birth to support lactation. So like what she's saying, it's really hard to kind of challenge if you're breastfeeding. It might be different if you're not breastfeeding, but forget the recovery for your body for a second. If you're trying to support breastfeeding, it's really hard to also focus on body composition if you want some immediate effects, and then also having to be eating in a surplus to, and if you start adding a lot of physical activity, then you need to eat in even more of a surplus. And I can just say, as a mom, and I did have not necessarily family support, but I had some like a nanny helping me, but it was still hard to remember, like for me to eat, I'm trying to, I'm still getting up and I get to go back to bed as soon as I'm done breastfeeding, but I still had to get up at night. I'm cooking dinner for, my husband. I'm still trying to do things around the house. Like, and then food was challenging. Now you have to eat in a surplus and you want to exercise, and then you need to eat even more. It's just challenging. So I think trying to encourage people to figure out, are you breastfeeding, like kind of let your body do what it's doing if you're supporting breastfeeding first, and then kind of worry about the body composition piece later. Because it's more of what I would look at is like a long-term game. Like if you want body composition results, like doing it very slow and taking your time is the way that you're going to have lasting results, in my opinion, versus and this is the same for non-pregnant person, going on an extreme diet, restricting your calories, generally speaking, doesn't equate to what you want. You might lose weight fast, but you're going to lose muscle too, right? And you're going to feel like crap and you're going to be tired. And, and then you're more likely to binge when you come off a super restrictive diet. So it's not conducive to what your end goal really is, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I mean,
Go on,
and then what I was going to say is, no, we don't have the literature on it. I will tell you that Kate Ackerman, Nicole Fansworth, they're working on developing a sports science research agenda for the postpartum athlete, but it's just an agenda. It's just an agenda, like where I'm part of that Delphi study as a practitioner, so I can see what we're looking at. But that's what I talk about with bridging the gap, because we just don't have it. And again, like we don't study pregnant people. We're not gonna categorize people and say like, well, maybe we'll put these people at risk if we don't know what's going to happen. What I will say is Dr. Margie Davenport out of the University of Alberta is doing quite a bit on the exercise side and challenging like high intensity interval training. They're doing work on elite professional athletes because, you know, you look at the Olympics and kind of some of these circuits, we're doing it. So we are past this point of like, maybe we'll wait and see. There are women who are doing it. And so now we're just starting to be able to get to look at least that's the movement piece. It's not the nutrition piece. So the nutrition specific information that we have, again, is very general. It's very vague. Most of it is for the fetus. What we do know kind of throughout the trimesters are maybe the specific micronutrient profiles, but I'm going to tell you, like anything else, the hierarchy of needs is going to be energy availability, macronutrients kind of from there, that distribution. Then you get into micronutrients, then you get into, so like any other thing we would explore, especially in the sports performance space, that hierarchy of needs remains the same. What gets lost is the volume and the amount. So as Cassie's saying, so if we look at our first trimester, you know, yeah, it's an extra 250, 300-ish calories. It's about 300 calories extra a day throughout the course of pregnancy. In your third trimester, maybe 3 to 4, but that fourth trimester, you know, if you look at what research says, it's 450, 500. I have seen people who need upwards of 700 extra calories just to support lactation. So again, there's a huge variation there. So I'm cautious when I give those numbers because I have just seen it shift. Now, is it does that change? I can tell you some of that is the nature of the person who trained through their pregnancy. So again, I work predominantly with active populations, people who identify as athletes, and they're competing in some form or fashion. So already their needs are pretty high where we're just adjusting, you know, we're checking lab work to see what does iron look like, how's their vitamin D, we're watching bone health. I think the other thing to highlight here is sometimes, especially, you know, in the social media kind of glorified sales pitch world, you know, people are really trying to upsell pregnant women and they're trying to upsell the perimenopausal population. When we look at pregnant women, it's not like there's some random new nutrient or supplement we need. We need the same things, we just need more of them. So, you know, your blood volume is going to double over the course of pregnancy. You need to prioritize foods that contain iron, ideally before conception, because again, if for the first 14 weeks, you can't eat anything that contains that. All right, well, maybe you can in your second trimester. Also, you still might be averse to these things. So, you know, preparing people on that beforehand is really valuable, especially, you know, and we're usually able to with athletes who are strategically planning their pregnancies depending on their season and depending on different competitions they're going after. But yeah, we're definitely working with the stories and where people are meeting them. So even kind of being able to assess and make recommendations on those demands, as Cassie said, you know, there are times where I see intentional underfueling, and there are other times where, especially in that postpartum period, it's not intentional. It's a time. Sometimes it's anxiety. So you think about the potential for a depression, suicidal ideations, not having any support at all, getting nap trapped and feeling like you can't put your baby down. There's so many reasons why you might not eat just because you don't feel like you can or you can't move. So there's a lot that comes into that isn't even, again, we can't even address it until we're in it almost. So
and then you end up making all these like sub recommendations because it's not like everyone's pregnancy is the same. Not everyone's labor is the
correct.
same. Everyone has postpartum. Listen, I see pictures of some people online 2 seconds after giving birth and they're smiling and they're happy. And then we know that some people's experiences are far different. You know, some people get, like she said, really bad postpartum. Some people don't. So how do you even create a recommendation? Well, it's like, okay, well, this, except it's like those books where you pick the different endings. It's going to be like, feel like that, like you're going to go here. And then if this happens, go here. And if you experience this, go here. It's just a lot.
Well, and Joey, I think that the recommendations we do have, at least there are some more settled discussions within like the return to running community. But with that, it's a timeline that says, okay, if you get here and this happens, you take a step back. So it's not a clear, in 12 weeks, this is what's going to happen. It's there's a progression and we need to watch and assess your body, but that's where pelvic health is incredibly important. Having pelvic health work, you need, in my mind, ideally, we have teams of support for the, especially at a high level, which we still don't have. You're starting to see a little bit more of like the pelvic health PT come into play. Nutrition is still untapped.
Because everybody's an expert in nutrition.
Yeah, you eat, and so therefore you can tell other people how to eat. It's ridiculous. So ideally you can consult with a team, and it doesn't have to be everything individual, but if people understood, again, if coaches understood what to expect from their athletes, same way we're talking about young girls, right? Like if coaches understood what to expect their athletes, if you're coaching athletes at a time in which they may potentially have babies, we can create some realistic expectations there versus why aren't they back on the pitch after 3 months? Like, why are they not here? Why are they not showing up?
Do you think rather than having, and because you're on the forefront of this and it's kind of exciting because you get to see this kind of information come out and hopefully contribute to this body of research, that maybe rather than having like a specific timeline, going more of, I'm going to use the word milestones because I'm a mom and that's like what I think of like for kids, but more of like maybe physical indicators. So like, if you're able to, I don't know, whatever physical, maybe something with pelvic floor, right? So if you're able to do this via pelvic floor exercise with no pain, then maybe this is an indicator that you're ready to step up to like the next part of exercise. Whereas some people might hit that at 10 weeks postpartum, whereas other people may hit that at, 15 weeks postpartum. So do you think that's maybe a better way of guiding it?
Yes. And that's actually that's what we have right now, is that's how they're discussing it. So it is more a matter of milestones. So you reach this, or we take a step back and we need to rework towards this. Or maybe you get there, you get injured, and we have to take a step towards that. Because what's the other part that's being interesting is, I think in some ways we are glorifying the athletes who are coming back in, again, look at the Olympics in 3 months, in 2 months, in 6 months. And that's not everybody's story. It won't be everybody's story. And if you listen to the conversations that happen thereafter or in other circles, you'll hear that some of these athletes had sacral stress fractures that then came up. Or, we're talking severe injuries because, again, if we are returning, our bodies are incredible. You're capable of pushing it, but if it's not in the best interest and you're not recovered, then, even just looking at pregnancy, what happens physiologically, like our bone density is going to take a dip. It will bounce back in most cases. That's just our bone density around the 2-year mark. But if you are not getting adequate nutrition to support it, then, we're now at risk for more issues. So, understanding like, what is the cost? What does this look like? But yeah, to be able to put a clear timeline on it just generally, I think is unrealistic.
Yeah, I recall back when I was a grad student, I don't know if Cassie was alive when I was a grad student.
Probably not. No, you said something in 1984. I wasn't born yet.
Well,
me neither, Cass. I feel like we're in the same bracket.
If I count masters and PhD, so we're talking roughly 86 to 93-ish. Okay. So were you alive?
87. I came around in 87.
Okay. Well, what's interesting is during that time, I remember one of the issues with physiology or exercise physiology was there's no studies on older adults. Like, we need to do studies, because all the studies, the complaint was, all we're doing is studying college kids. Okay, we know what college kids can do. What about older adults? Well, now fast forward to now, we actually have now a lot of studies on older adults, whether it's, hey, we have weight training data on 90-year-olds. We have protein supplementation also on very old people. So really the one category that isn't studied, and I can understand why, because it's difficult, is either pregnant women, which would be very difficult, but what about postpartum? So, and the reason I thought about this is I was getting ready for a sports nutrition class, and I was just reading the literature on aerobic versus resistance training and how it affects body comp. And there's actually a lot more than I thought. So really a simple, and if someone wants to do a PhD, a dissertation on this, it would actually be a great one. Get women postpartum and just do a simple training study for 6 months. One group does cardio, one group just weight training, And just to see, is there a difference in how women respond postpartum with two different kinds of training? The answer is nobody really knows. And certainly, this is really more for the recreational exerciser, not really. If you're competitive, you know what you're doing. But most people aren't competitive. They just they want to work out. They want to be in better shape. So it's an easy question to ask, a hard question to answer, but nobody is, or actually, I don't know if anyone's answering it, but I don't think anyone is, but it's kind of there. It's like, it's sort of where I think older adults were 20 or 30 years ago in terms of literature. It's sort of where we are with postpartum, you know, with women. No one, and I can understand it's a difficult population to grab, but I think there is an opportunity here for people who want to do research in this category.
What I will say is, oh no, it left me. I do think, you know, I'm trying to keep it athlete. I know, I'm trying to keep it athlete focused because I know that that's who we have predominantly listening. But having some of these conversations, Gen Pop, is interesting because we're just trying to get you. Now you're just talking about trying to get the basics. Like, so again, talking about Dr. Margie Davenport and the work that they do, exercise is better than no exercise. So this goes back to Cassie, physician recommendations, these very safe, don't get your heart rate above this. Don't do anything new if you've never done it. Well, that's BS. If you're not moving and you start moving, the outcomes for you and for your baby are going to be better. So we all need to be, you know, this comes back to like, movement is not going to be a bad thing. So what is your entry point and how do we get you to start doing that? So that was my Gen Pop note, is the question that we're starting to ask now, at least in the circles that I float in, or we're trying to push, at least when we speak with physicians, is instead of telling people all of the detriments of exercising, like, no, let's talk to them about what happens if you don't exercise, if you don't move your body, if we aren't incorporating intentional nourishment into your diet, right? There's, what are we capable of, right? Again, versus, oh gosh, like women are fragile. We're not fragile. Yeah, we're capable of, and I dealt with all of that too. And I think, you know, we talk about educating in the athletic performance space. We need to also be educating in the medical space. And I have many clients who are physicians, friends. A lot of my one-on-one clients are practitioners themselves. And so that kind of tends to funnel down. But, you know, they have no nutrition education. They don't have exercise training education. Even when you look at obstetricians, I mean, OBGYNs are trained surgeons. So actually, sometimes within
an OBGYN ask me like a nutrition question, because it came out that like I was a dietitian or something. And I was flattered, but it was also nice to hear that like a doctor was actually interested in like hearing something about nutrition.
Yeah. I mean, it's so, you know, I have a midwife, so a little bit different. There's like a little bit more of a holistic approach, but my midwife isn't trained in kind of the athletic realm of things. So again, like if you have someone who walks in who's very capable, like very well trained, then that's going to be a very different, or it needs to start to become a different conversation than what you would have with someone who's more Gen Pop, doesn't typically exercise, doesn't meet minimum baselines, needs some like basic dietary education. You're talking about two different people. So to hand someone a piece of paper that says, you can't eat sushi and you can't do these things and you have to keep your heart rate under beats per minute. I mean, yeah, you have to just shake your head and say, okay, like we need to collectively do better. Or again, you know, being in a place, at least you were somewhere where you were able to find a provider you felt aligned with, but we have people in parts of this country that don't have access to that. So what did they do? So continuing to find ways of education to meet people so they can make, you know, they're not scared to move, or they're not scared to eat foods that might in fact be incredibly beneficial for them to eat throughout the course of their pregnancy.
In the interest of time, Mel, if you could give the audience a few key bullet points in terms of advice for the postpartum athlete, right, in terms of nutrition. And then second question is, where could people find more information about you if you're giving a talk somewhere, et cetera, et cetera?
Sure. You can find me at Nutrition by Mel, nutritionbymel.com. Those are the best ways. I'm actually speaking at the Female Athlete Conference on recommendations for postpartum athlete nutrition, which will be fun. That'll be in June. which means I'll miss us this year, but I'll be at us next year. So kind of speaking to the bigger postpartum tips, if you are in a position to take your time to recover, please give yourself permission to take your time to recover. There is no reason to rush this process, again, especially in those first 3 months, those first 40 days. If you look at any other country, most women don't even get out of bed. They are just served food and they're snuggling with their baby. And I'm not saying that's what you have to do, but I'm saying there's a reason why culturally that's been done for generations and years to allow for our recovery. So, give yourself the space to take a step back and do that. Prioritize your overall energy intake. So again, in the hierarchy of needs postpartum, like calories really do matter. Nutrient dense foods really do matter. Think warm foods, soups, stews, curries. If you are open to incorporating some sort of organ meat into your diet, it can be as part of like a chop meat or burgers or meatballs. But there's an incredible amount of nutrition to that. These are all things like easy to digest. It's not the time to have salads. It's not the time to have smoothies. It is definitely a time to have warm food that nutrients can easily assimilate into your body. Like your organs were all smushed around. You have this big giant plate-sized hole in the middle of your abdomen. Like we really need to let it heal. And then the other thing is if you are looking to breastfeed, additionally, that requires some extra nutrition support. Understand that if you're restricting your intake, that low energy availability can reduce milk production. The stress, the anxiety can reduce milk production. Yeah.
Before I forget milk, because I forget stuff like I'll walk in the room, I'm like, why did I walk in this room? Okay, this just came to mind. I've been meaning to ask you this. Would you recommend taking creatine during pregnancy?
Yes. Pre, during, post, please. Please. 1,000,000%.
My wife did.
So.
Yeah, my wife took it. Actually, my kids took it when they still take it, but they took it as young kids playing softball. So just wanted to get that. Cassie, did you take creatine during pregnancy?
I did. I took creatine and I took fish oil, and I probably took that more consistently than I did my prenatal vitamin.
Same.
Hey, fish oil.
Prenatal's a good, like,
just never
general
bought new one.
Yeah, fish oil is great. I mean, I'm sure you've seen the data on fish oil and brain health and all that stuff. So yeah, I mean, big fan of creatine, obviously, big fan of fish oil. So Melanie, thank you so much for being on the Sports Science Dude podcast. This was very informative. I mean, it's an area that, hey, I admit I know nothing about. So I rely on people like you to educate folks like me and my pals. So appreciate you being on the show. Cassie, thank you very much. And I'll have this posted hopefully in like 24 to 48 hours. So Mel, I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Yeah, anytime. Always a pleasure.
And we'll miss you at ISSN, but hopefully, in the future, you and your husband.
I know.
Good luck moving.
Next year we'll be there. Thank you. Yeah, the moving is big.
All right. Well, thanks, and enjoy the day.
All right. You both as well.